My name is Elena Marlo, and I am 37 years old. If you had asked me a year ago who I trusted most in this world, I would have said my husband, Ryan. I would have told you he was my partner, my anchor, the man I built my life around. But that was before the forest, before the day he abandoned me and our 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, to die. It began as an ordinary camping trip, or at least that's what I thought it was meant to be. Ryan loved the outdoors, and his circle of friends treated these excursions as little escapes from the world. He invited me and Sophie to join them this time, telling us it would be a chance to relax, to bond as a family. Sophie was thrilled. She had been chattering about marshmallows and campfires for days, her little backpack stuffed with crayons and a notebook where she drew pictures of the forest she imagined we'd explore together. We arrived at the clearing in the late afternoon. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the golden light of the setting sun filtered through tall trees. Ryan's friends were already there, laughter echoing between the trunks as they unpacked coolers and folded chairs. Their voices felt too loud, their smiles a little too forced, but I ignored the unease prickling at the back of my neck. Sophie tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, can we go see the stream before dinner?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Just a short walk, okay? We'll be back before anyone notices." Ryan barely glanced at us when we told him we were heading down the trail. He just waved a distracted hand, more interested in unpacking drinks with his friends than in where his wife and daughter were going. I remember feeling a faint sting then, but I pushed it aside. The walk was short, no more than 15 minutes. Sophie skipped ahead, pointing out wildflowers and strange mushrooms, her laughter bright against the stillness of the woods. We reached the stream, its water glinting silver in the fading light, and she crouched down to watch minnows dart between the stones. It was peaceful. For those few minutes, I felt almost happy, almost safe. But when we turned back toward camp, everything changed. The clearing was empty. At first, I thought I had taken a wrong turn, that maybe we had stumbled into the wrong spot. But no, the fire pit was there, still smoldering faintly, the tire tracks in the dirt, the flattened patches where tents had stood. Only now, the tents were gone. The cars were gone. The coolers, the bags, the voices, gone. Sophie's laughter died on her lips. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Mom, where did everybody go?" I swallowed hard, scanning the area, my pulse thundering in my ears. Maybe they went for a drive, or to get more firewood. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. No one takes their tents and food to gather wood. And then I saw it. A folding table stood in the center of the clearing. On it lay a single piece of paper, weighed down by a smooth gray rock. My hands trembled as I lifted it. Sophie clutched my arm, her little fingers digging into my sleeve. The words were scrawled in Ryan's handwriting. "This is for the best. Trust me." My stomach dropped. My vision blurred, and for a second, I couldn't breathe. Sophie's voice cracked beside me. "Mom, Daddy wrote that?" I couldn't answer. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, sharp and brutal. He hadn't gone for help. He hadn't gotten lost. He had left us. The silence of the forest pressed in, thick and suffocating. No hum of conversation, no clatter of dishes, no laughter. Just the faint rustle of leaves and my daughter's ragged breathing. Sophie tugged at me again, her eyes shimmering with tears. "Mom, are we going to die out here?" I dropped to my knees in front of her, cupping her face in my hands. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "No, baby, we are not going to die. Do you hear me? We are going to survive this." "But how? We don't have food. We don't have a car. We don't have—" She broke into sobs, burying her face in my chest. I held her tight, pressing my lips to the top of her head. Inside, fear clawed at me, whispering all the ways this could end. But louder than fear was something else. A mother's fury, burning hotter than fire. Ryan thought he could erase me. He thought he could erase us, but he had no idea who I truly was, what I was capable of when it came to protecting my child. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Evidence, proof, a reminder of what he had done and why I could never forgive him. Sophie sniffled, her small hand clutching mine. "What do we do now, Mom?" I looked around the clearing, the empty space where laughter had once filled the air. The betrayal pulsed in my chest like a second heartbeat. "We survive," I whispered. "One night at a time, one day at a time, and when we get out of here—" My voice hardened. colder than I'd ever heard it. They will regret this. The sky was darkening, the forest stretching into endless shadows. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, its voice low and haunting. I pulled Sophie close, forcing myself to focus. Tonight we would need shelter. Tomorrow we would start fighting for our lives. But deep inside, another thought pulsed like a promise. This wasn't just survival anymore, this was war. The first night was the hardest. Without tents, without blankets, without even a fire, Sophie and I lay huddled together beneath the wide, merciless sky. The ground was cold, the air damp, and every sound of the forest felt amplified. Cracking branches, the distant howl of coyotes, the eerie call of owls. Sophie shivered in my arms, her little body trembling not only from the chill, but from the terror she couldn't put into words. I whispered stories into her hair, old tales my father used to tell me when I was a child. Stories of survival, of resilience, of how he had taught me to read the woods when I was a girl tagging along on his hunting trips. Back then, I never thought those lessons would matter. Now they were the only thing keeping me from breaking down. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," I murmured. "I'll keep you safe." But the truth was, I didn't sleep at all that night. My mind raced, calculating, planning. Ryan and his friends had stripped us of everything: supplies, food, safety nets. But they hadn't stripped me of my will to fight. Days 1-3. Instincts awaken. By dawn, I was already moving. I gathered branches and leaves, showing Sophie how to weave them into a crude lean-to against the side of a fallen log. It wasn't perfect, but it shielded us from the wind. We had only half a bottle of water between us, so I taught Sophie how to collect rainwater by tying my shirt between branches to funnel drops into a hollowed log. She watched with wide, desperate eyes, soaking up every movement, as if memorizing survival itself. "Mom," she whispered when the first droplets trickled in, "you're like a superhero." I smiled faintly, though my heart ached. "No, baby, I'm just your mom, and that's stronger than any superhero." Food was harder. Sophie's stomach growled constantly, and I felt mine twisting in emptiness. I remembered my father's voice: "Look for berries that birds eat. Avoid mushrooms unless you know them by heart." I guided Sophie to bushes heavy with small, dark berries. She hesitated before eating, but hunger overcame fear. That first handful of tart fruit kept us alive. At night, when coyotes howled in the distance, I wrapped my arms around her tightly. She would press her ear against my chest, listening to the steadiness of my heartbeat as if it was the only proof we would see the sunrise again. Days 4-6, the breaking point. By the fourth day, exhaustion hit us like a tidal wave. Sophie's lips were cracked and bleeding. Her small legs shook whenever she tried to stand. Her voice grew weaker, threaded with despair. "Mom," she asked again one night, her words broken by sobs, Are we going to die out here?" I wanted to cry with her. My throat burned with the answer I couldn't give, but I forced a smile, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. "No," I said firmly. "We are not going to die. We are going to show them who we are." She frowned, confusion and fear mixing in her eyes. "Who we are?" "Strong," I whispered. "Unbreakable. They thought they could leave us behind, but we're going to prove them wrong." The fire in my voice wasn't just for her, it was for me. Each word forged a new piece of armor around my breaking heart. On the 6th day, my prayers were answered. We stumbled upon a stream, glinting in the afternoon light. We dropped to our knees, drinking until our stomachs ached, laughing and crying at once. The cold water against my lips felt like a miracle, and I silently thanked the heavens, tears mixing with the river. That night, for the first time, Sophie fell asleep with a faint smile on her face, the terror momentarily soothed. Days 7-10, the long walk. Strength slowly returned, enough for us to move. I tore strips from Sophie's shoelaces and my own jacket to fashion crude walking sticks. We followed the stream downhill, step after painful step, my legs screaming with every mile. Sophie never complained. She simply gripped my hand, determination flickering in her tired eyes. My daughter, my fragile little girl, was learning to fight in ways she never should have had to. On the 10th day, our bodies battered but alive, we stumbled onto a dirt road. I barely believed it was real at first. The faint tire tracks, the dusty path cutting through the trees. I almost fell to my knees in relief. Then I heard the rumble of an engine. A ranger's truck appeared, rounding the bend. The man inside slammed on the brakes when he saw us. 2 figures ragged, filthy, sunburned, but alive. "My God," he gasped as he jumped out, eyes wide. "People have been searching for you for over a week. Your husband said you wandered off and never came back." The words slammed into me like a knife. I turned slowly toward Sophie. Her little jaw clenched, her face pale and streaked with dirt, but in her eyes, anger. Pure, quiet anger. "He lied," she whispered. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about truth, about justice, about showing the world exactly what Ryan had done. As the ranger wrapped us in blankets and radioed for help, I slipped my hand into Sophie's. She squeezed it tight, her grip fierce. We had survived the forest. But now, the real war was about to begin. When the ranger's truck rolled into town, people stopped and stared. Cameras flashed, voices rose, and for a fleeting second, it felt as though Sophie and I were miracles. 2 ghosts returned from the wilderness. Strangers gaped at our dirt-streaked faces, our tattered clothes, our hollow eyes. But I didn't feel like a miracle. I felt like a soldier, stepping back into a battlefield. The ranger ushered us into the police station. Sophie clung to my side, wrapped in a borrowed blanket that seemed too big for her small, fragile frame. Her cheeks were pale, her lips still cracked. I kept an arm around her shoulders, steadying her, though it was really her presence that steadied me. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed, the sterile smell of coffee and paper filling the air. Behind the desk, officers exchanged quick, sharp glances. They had questions, but I wasn't ready to answer them yet. Ryan was already there. He sat in one of the waiting chairs, his hair neatly combed, his shirt crisp, as though he hadn't been missing a wife and daughter for 10 days. Around him, his friends hovered, whispering rehearsed words, faces painted with carefully arranged worry. When he saw me, he froze. For a split second, I saw something raw in his eyes, shock, maybe even fear. But then his mask slid back into place. He stood, arms outstretched. "Elena," he said, his voice full of manufactured relief. "Thank God. We thought you were gone. We searched everywhere." "Stop!" My voice cut through the room like glass. Sophie pressed closer against me, her small hand gripping mine so tightly my fingers ached. She didn't need to hear his lies, not now. But Ryan didn't stop. He turned to the officers, gesturing animatedly. "They wandered off," he insisted. "We looked for them. Days of searching, calling their names." One of the officers cleared his throat. "We've checked search logs. None of you reported back after day 1. No flyers, no hospital inquiries, no follow-ups." His eyes narrowed. "Doesn't quite fit with your story." Ryan's smile faltered, but only for a moment. He launched into more explanations, his friends chiming in with pitiful nods and murmurs. But the cracks were already showing. The facade was fragile, too fragile. I said nothing. Not yet. Patience was my weapon now. Bursting into rage would only play into his performance. No. If I was going to destroy Ryan, it had to be with evidence so undeniable it crushed him. Sophie tugged gently at my sleeve. Her voice was so soft I almost missed it. "Mom, he left us. Why is he lying?" I knelt down to meet her eyes. They were red, swollen, but fierce in a way that startled me. My little girl had been forced to grow up too quickly. "Because people like him are afraid of the truth," I whispered. "But the truth always finds its way." That night, when we finally returned to what used to be our home, I felt the weight of it pressing on my chest. The living room smelled the same, the walls looked the same, but it wasn't home anymore, not with Ryan there, not with betrayal steeped into every corner. And then Daniel appeared. My teenage son, 16, tall for his age with the same dark eyes as mine, rushed down the stairs. His face crumpled when he saw us. "Mom, Sophie!" He threw his arms around us, holding on as though he could never let go. Sophie buried her face in his shirt, sobbing, while I simply stood there, trembling under the weight of his embrace. "I knew it," Daniel choked out. "I knew he was lying. He told everyone you ran away, that you just left. But I didn't believe him. I couldn't." I glanced past him. Ryan lingered in the doorway, his smile stretched tight, his hands shoved into his pockets. For once, he didn't speak. Daniel pulled back, looking me dead in the eyes. "What really happened, Mom?" I opened my mouth, but Sophie spoke first. Her small voice, thin and cracked from days of thirst, filled the silence. "He left us to die," she whispered. Her hands curled into fists. "Daddy left us in the forest, and I'll never forgive him." Her words hit harder than any accusation I could have made. Ryan flinched as though struck, but he still said nothing. In that moment, standing in my own house with my children clinging to me, I understood something with absolute clarity. My fight wasn't just for me anymore. It wasn't even just for Sophie. It was for both of them. For Daniel, who had endured 10 days of lies, and for Sophie, who had carried scars no child should ever carry. Justice wasn't optional, it was inevitable. I looked at Ryan then, really looked at him. The man I once trusted, the man I thought would stand beside me until the end. All I saw now was a stranger, a coward, a liar, and I made myself a silent promise. He would regret underestimating me. He would regret underestimating us. The days that followed were a blur of whispers, sideways glances, and forced politeness. Ryan kept up his performance, speaking in gentle tones, telling neighbors and relatives how grateful he was that Sophie and I had been found. To anyone who didn't know better, he looked like a man relieved to have his family back. But I knew the truth, and so did Sophie. She refused to speak to him. Every time he tried to approach her, she'd step behind me or Daniel. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. The silence between father and daughter wasn't just awkward, it was damning. Children don't pretend. They don't hide the truth when it burns that deeply. At night, when Sophie finally fell asleep curled up beside me, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling. My chest ached with anger, but beneath the fury, a colder, sharper determination grew. Ryan had left us to die. He had written the note, and yet here he was, smiling at the world, pretending to be the worried husband, the loving father. That wasn't just betrayal, that was attempted murder. And I was done waiting for fate to catch up with him. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Her name was Marissa Hale, a sharp, steel-eyed woman who didn't waste time on pleasantries. She listened without interruption as I told her everything. How Sophie and I had been abandoned, how we survived, what the ranger said, how Ryan had lied. When I slid the folded note across her desk, her expression hardened. "This is enough to open doors," she said, tapping the paper with her manicured nail. "But if we're going to bring him down, we need more. Solid proof. Evidence no one can ignore." I nodded. "Then let's get it." And so we began to build. Piece by piece, we collected the puzzle that would expose Ryan for what he was. First, the note, the one thing he couldn't deny, his handwriting, his words. "This is for the best. Trust me." Marissa had it photographed, preserved, and registered as evidence. Second, the ranger's testimony. He confirmed that Ryan had claimed Sophie and I wandered off and never came back. He recalled how suspicious it sounded, how Ryan's demeanor didn't match the panic of a man searching for his wife and child. Third, the medical reports. Sophie's malnourishment, her dehydration, the bruises on her arms and legs from sleeping on roots and rocks, my own blood work showing extreme fatigue and fluid loss, proof that we hadn't simply gotten lost for a day or two. Proof of deliberate abandonment. Fourth, the financial records. Ryan and his friends had spent those 10 days indulging themselves, restaurants, upside, even a bar tab that stretched past midnight. While Sophie and I were curled on the cold ground, they were sipping cocktails and laughing. The contrast made me sick, but it also made the case stronger. We moved quietly, deliberately. I didn't confront Ryan. I didn't scream or throw accusations across the dinner table, though every fiber of me wanted to. No, my silence was more dangerous than any outburst could have been. Ryan thought my quiet meant weakness. He thought I was broken. But the truth was, I was sharpening myself into a weapon, biding my time until the strike would be fatal. Sophie picked up on it too. One evening, she tugged at my sleeve as I was reviewing papers with Marissa. "Mom," she whispered, "what are you doing?" I gathered her onto my lap, smoothing her hair as I chose my words carefully. "I'm making sure," I told her, "that what your father did won't go unpunished, that no one will ever be able to say it was an accident, that the truth will be too strong to ignore." She leaned her head against my chest, her voice muffled. "Good, because he doesn't get to just smile like nothing happened." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to nod. "Exactly. We're going to make sure he can't hide anymore." Daniel was different. He was old enough to understand the weight of what was happening, and his anger boiled hotter than Sophie's quiet rage. "Mom," he said one night, his voice sharp with fury, "why don't we just tell everyone? Why don't we just call him out and let the world see?" I studied my son. the way his fists clenched, the way his jaw set. He reminded me so much of myself at that age. Restless, fiery, unwilling to wait. Because, I said softly, if we move too soon, they'll twist it. They'll call us liars. They'll make us look unstable. But if we build this right, if we wait until the foundation is unshakable, then when the truth comes out, it will bury him. Daniel's glare softened, his eyes flickering with reluctant understanding. He nodded slowly. So, we wait. But when the time comes, I interrupted, we strike, and it will be final. For weeks I lived two lives. To the outside world, I was the quiet wife, the mother recovering from a terrible ordeal. I smiled when neighbors offered condolences, nodded when reporters pressed for details. I kept my face calm, my voice steady. But behind closed doors, I was relentless, collecting statements, documenting timelines, cross-checking every lie Ryan told against the evidence piling higher and higher. And through it all, I kept Sophie and Daniel close. They were my anchor, my reason. Every bruise on Sophie's body, every tear she shed in the forest, every nightmare she whispered about in her sleep, those were the flames fueling me. This wasn't just justice anymore. This was survival in another form. Because Ryan had already tried to erase us once, I wasn't going to give him the chance to try again. The final piece came from Marissa one crisp afternoon. She set a folder on the table in front of me, her lips curling into the faintest of smiles. It's airtight, she said. The note, the ranger, the medical reports, the financial records. It's all there. We don't even have to argue. We just have to show it. I placed my hand over the folder, my pulse racing. For the first time since that day in the woods, I felt something close to hope. Not relief, not peace, but the glimmer of a weapon finally ready to be unsheathed. Ryan thought he had won, but the reckoning was coming. And when it did, he wouldn't just lose. He would regret every choice, every laugh, every step that led him to abandon me and my daughter in the forest. The storm broke sooner than I expected. One morning, just weeks after Marissa assured me the case was airtight, two detectives arrived at the house. Their expressions were clipped, professional, but I saw it in their eyes, the scent of blood in the water. Mrs. Marlo, one said, flipping open a notebook, we'd like to ask you a few follow-up questions. Your husband has given us his statement, but, well, some things don't quite add up. I could have laughed. Some things? Nothing about Ryan's story added up. I invited them in, offered coffee, and answered every question with calm precision. I gave them the note. I recounted the ranger's words. I described how Sophie and I survived with nothing but rainwater and berries. And when Sophie appeared in the hallway, her small face pale but her voice steady, she confirmed it all. He left us, she whispered, clutching the hem of my shirt. He said we wandered off, but he left us. The detectives exchanged a glance, their pens scratching rapidly across their pages. By the time they left, Ryan's house of lies had already started to crack. That afternoon, the news broke. Mother and daughter survived 10 days in wilderness, husband under investigation. The headline flashed across local stations, then regional, then national. By evening, social media was ablaze. People dissected every photograph, every timestamp, every post Ryan and his friends had made during those 10 days. Their smiling faces at restaurants, their cocktails by the pool. It was damning. The public turned on them overnight. Who goes out drinking while their wife and daughter are missing? One comment read. Monsters. Absolute monsters, said another. Ryan's friends began to panic. Paparazzi crowded their driveways. Employers issued statements, distancing themselves from the scandal. What once had been their little circle of laughter and indulgence became a prison of whispers and flashing cameras. And Ryan? He tried to keep his mask on, but cracks showed with every passing day. His smiles grew thinner, his hands shook when he thought no one was looking. I saw it all, and I said nothing. Silence was my weapon. The legal system moved quickly once momentum built. The police investigation deepened. Bank statements revealed damning patterns. Search records confirmed negligence. The note, his own handwriting, was now entered into evidence. Ryan was called in for questioning multiple times. He stuck to his story at first. We wandered off. He searched. He tried. But every time the detectives returned, his voice grew tighter, his excuses weaker. Marissa updated me daily. They're circling him, she said with a sharp smile. It's only a matter of time before he drowns. But the law wasn't my only battlefield. The court of public opinion was merciless. Headlines screamed, "Husband and friends face allegations of abandoning family in woods. Survival story or attempted murder? The truth emerges." Reporters hounded them at every turn. Neighbors stopped talking to them. Once admired members of the community, they were now pariahs. One evening, I watched from the window as Ryan stormed up the driveway, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing with endless notifications. He slammed the door behind him, muttering curses under his breath. "Why won't they stop?" he snarled, slamming his phone on the counter. "It was just a mistake. People get lost all the time." I met his gaze calmly, Sophie standing silently at my side. "No," I said softly, "we weren't lost. You left us." The words hung in the air, sharp as a blade. His face twisted, but he said nothing. For the first time, Ryan seemed to understand that his charm couldn't save him anymore. The next strike was mine. With Marissa's guidance, I filed for full custody of Sophie and Daniel. The petition cited endangerment, neglect, and attempted harm. The evidence was overwhelming, and the judge didn't hesitate. Ryan's custody rights were stripped immediately. When the decision was announced in court, Sophie squeezed my hand, whispering, "Does this mean we don't have to go back to him ever again?" I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. Never again. Ryan's face darkened, but he couldn't fight it. Not with the note, not with the ranger, not with Sophie's bruises and nightmares. Civil suits followed. Marissa filed claims for damages, medical expenses, emotional distress, reputational harm. Ryan's finances, once comfortable, began to unravel. His accounts froze under court order, his credit lines collapsed, his friends bled money into their lawyers just to stay afloat. The cocktail nights, the spa visits, the smug laughter, they were gone. Now every dollar they spent went into the black hole of legal defense. But the true turning point came not from paperwork or headlines, but from Sophie. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those wide, haunted eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "are we safe now?" I brushed her hair back gently. "We're safer than before, and soon we'll be free." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. Then, after a pause, she added, "I hope he knows what he did. I hope he feels it every single day." I kissed her forehead, my chest aching with a mother's rage and sorrow. "He will," I promised, "because the reckoning has only just begun." Ryan thought abandoning us in the forest would erase me, but all he did was awaken the part of me he should have feared most, the part that refuses to break. And now the world was watching. His downfall had already begun. The courtroom smelled of varnished wood and old paper, the air thick with tension that seemed to seep into my skin. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer Marissa beside me, her eyes sharp, her folders stacked high with evidence. Across the aisle sat Ryan, flanked by his own legal team, his face pale and tight, his tie knotted too perfectly, as though neatness could disguise rot. He wouldn't look at me. The judge entered, his gavel cracking against the wood, and the trial began. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid out the evidence with the precision of a surgeon cutting into flesh. The note, the ranger's testimony, the medical reports, the bank statements. Each piece stacked higher, heavier, until the weight of it all was suffocating. Photos appeared on the screen at the front of the courtroom. Sophie's thin, sunburned face after 10 days in the wild, the bruises on her small arms, images of Ryan and his friends laughing over cocktails during those same days. The jury shifted uncomfortably, disgust flickering across their faces. Ryan's lawyer tried to spin it. He called it a misunderstanding, a tragic accident. He insisted Ryan panicked and left to search from another area, but each defense collapsed under the simplest scrutiny. And then came Sophie. She was so small standing there in front of the microphone, her feet barely reaching the stool's footrest. Her voice shook at first, but then it grew steadier, each word cutting deeper than any piece of evidence could. "He left us," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "My daddy. He left us in the forest with nothing. No food, no car, just a note." The courtroom was silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle, just the trembling voice of a little girl who had endured more than most adults could imagine. "I don't want to live with him ever again," she said finally, her words breaking but firm. A ripple of gasps swept the room. Someone in the gallery sniffled. The judge's expression hardened. Ryan, for the first time, broke. His head dropped into his hands. His shoulders shook, not with remorse, but with fear. He knew in that moment he had lost. The verdict came swiftly. "Guilty," the judge declared, his voice ringing like thunder through the chamber. reckless endangerment, attempted manslaughter by abandonment. Ryan's friends, once smug and confident, now stared at the floor as bailiffs moved toward them. One by one, handcuffs clicked around their wrists. Ryan's face was white, his lips trembling. He glanced at me then, just once. It wasn't anger I saw in his eyes, nor love, nor even hatred. It was defeat. And I met that gaze with nothing. No pity, no rage, just silence. The same silence he had left me in the forest with. But the punishment wasn't just legal. It was personal, intimate, cutting deeper than prison bars. When the judge granted me full custody of Sophie and Daniel, Ryan tried to protest, his voice hoarse. "They're my kids!" he shouted, his voice echoing desperately across the chamber. The judge silenced him with a single strike of the gavel. "They are children you abandoned," he said sternly. "They are not yours to claim." Daniel sat behind me, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a mixture of fury and relief. Sophie leaned against me, her tiny hand clutching mine. For the first time since the forest, I felt her relax, as though some invisible chain had finally been broken. After court adjourned, reporters swarmed outside the courthouse. Flashbulbs exploded, microphones thrust forward, voices shouting questions. "Elena, how do you feel? Do you believe justice was done? What would you say to your husband now?" I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I simply held Sophie's hand in one of mine, Daniel's in the other, and walked forward. The cameras captured us, not as victims, but as survivors. Behind us, Ryan was led away in handcuffs, the man who once thought he could erase me reduced to a broken figure in a wrinkled suit. His friends followed, each with bowed heads, their futures shattered by their own cruelty. The same people who laughed as they drove away from camp now stood disgraced, stripped of everything. Justice had spoken. That night, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with tired, tearful eyes. "Mom," she whispered, "it's really over, isn't it?" I smoothed her hair and kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." But deep inside, I knew something else. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. Because the truth had triumphed. And now, with my children safe beside me, I could finally start to rebuild the life Ryan had tried so hard to destroy. In the weeks after the trial, silence finally returned to our home, not the heavy silence of fear and betrayal, but a gentle quiet that felt like healing. For the first time in months, Sophie slept through the night without waking in terror. Daniel stopped pacing the hallways, stopped snapping at shadows. We weren't the same family we had been before the forest. We never would be. But maybe that was a gift. We were stronger now, bound by something unbreakable, survival. At first, the world wouldn't leave us alone. Reporters still circled, hungry for new angles. Some called us heroes, others called us victims. But I refused to let our story be defined by pity. When a local community center asked me to speak at a survival fundraiser, I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength. But then I thought of Sophie, of Daniel, of the countless mothers and children trapped in invisible forests of their own. Betrayal, abuse, neglect. So I stood on that stage, my palms sweating, and told our story. Not as tragedy, not as scandal. As proof. Proof that strength can come from the deepest wounds. Proof that betrayal doesn't have to break you. Proof that sometimes the very people who try to bury you end up digging their own graves. People listened. More invitations followed. Schools, fundraisers, survival programs. At first, my voice shook, but over time, I grew steadier. Each time I spoke, I felt something inside me heal a little more. Sophie would sometimes sit in the front row, sketching in her notebook, her small smile lifting me higher than any applause. Daniel often stood by the door, protective, proud, no longer a boy, but a young man forged in fire. Our scars became our armor. The irony was inescapable. Ryan had thought he could erase me, that by leaving me in the woods, I would vanish quietly. But his plan had backfired in the most spectacular way. Instead of erasing me, he made me unforgettable. Instead of silencing me, he gave me a voice that people wanted to hear. Instead of breaking our family, he made us unshakable. One evening, months after the sentencing, Sophie climbed onto my lap while I was reviewing notes for a speech. She was taller now, her cheeks less hollow, her eyes brighter. But there was still a shadow in them, a shadow that would take years to fade. "Mom," she said softly, "do you remember the note he left?" I froze. How could I forget? Those words haunted me even now. She recited them quietly, her voice almost mocking. This is for the best, trust me. Her lips curled into the faintest defiant smile. You know what? He was right. I blinked, startled. What do you mean? She looked at me with eyes far too wise for her age. Because it was for the best. We're stronger now. We're happier. We don't need him. Tears stung my eyes, but I held her close, laughing through the ache in my chest. Out of the mouths of children, sometimes the deepest truths are spoken. Ryan's words, meant to condemn us, had become our victory. Daniel, too, carried his own strength. One day he came home from school, dropping his bag by the door with a grin. I joined the debate team, he announced. Figured if Dad could lie so easily, I should learn how to fight with the truth. I laughed, my heart swelling with pride. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. He was turning pain into power. And so was I. Life moved on, piece by piece. Our home, once haunted by Ryan's shadow, became warm again. We painted the walls, rearranged the furniture, filled the rooms with new memories. The three of us ate dinners together, told stories, even laughed. That sound, so foreign in the forest, so impossible during the trial, returned to us like sunlight breaking through a storm. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake and think about Ryan, about the man who had promised me forever, only to leave me for dead, about the way his mask had finally cracked in court, his shoulders trembling under the weight of justice. And sometimes I wondered if he thought of us, if he lay awake in his cell, haunted by the sound of Sophie's voice as she told the world, he left us to die. But then I'd hear Sophie's soft breathing beside me, or Daniel's laughter drifting down the hall, and I'd realize it didn't matter. Ryan's legacy was prison walls and shattered lies. Ours was survival, strength, truth. Poetic justice has a strange way of writing itself. Ryan thought his note would be the last word. But in the end, the final word was ours. And it was victory. Years passed, seasons turned, the world moved on. But Ryan didn't. The man who once carried himself with charm and arrogance became nothing more than inmate number 47219. He never adapted to prison life. The crisp suits, the polished shoes, the easy laughter at brunches, gone. In their place was a gray uniform, cold concrete walls, and the endless monotony of meals served on plastic trays. At first, his friends clung together, defiant. But prison has a way of breaking alliances. One by one, they turned on each other, each scrambling for better plea deals, each whispering betrayals in the dark. The same bond that had once fueled their cruelty dissolved into suspicion and hatred. Betrayal devoured them from the inside, just as they once tried to let the wilderness devour me and Sophie. I saw his name in a newspaper one morning, years later. Inmate denied early release. Lack of remorse. The article was brief, almost dismissive, just a small column tucked between headlines about politics and sports. I stared at his photo for a long time. His face was lined, his eyes hollow. He looked nothing like the man I had once married. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. He had destroyed himself. I hadn't needed to finish him. He had done it all on his own. Meanwhile, our lives rebuilt in ways I never imagined possible. Sophie grew into a young woman with quiet strength in her veins. The wilderness had scarred her, yes, but it had also given her resilience no one could take away. She spoke with certainty, with clarity, her voice steady, even when the world tried to shake her. Daniel became a leader in his own right, driven, focused, protective. The fire that once simmered with anger turned into purpose. He pushed himself in school, then in college, determined to make something of the pain we endured. And me, I found my voice. We traveled together, telling our story, first in schools, then in survival programs, and eventually on national stages. Not as victims, but as proof. Proof that endurance can rise from ashes. Proof that betrayal cannot silence truth. One evening, after delivering a keynote at a wilderness survival fundraiser, we sat together at a quiet restaurant. Sophie, now grown, sketched idly on a napkin. Daniel sipped his drink, his eyes tired but bright. Then Sophie looked up with a small, mischievous smile. "Mom," she said softly, "remember the note?" My chest tightened. "Of course." She leaned closer, her voice calm but firm. "This is for the best. Trust me." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. Turns out he was right. I blinked, surprised. He lifted his glass in a quiet toast. It really was for the best. For a moment, silence held between us. Then laughter, real, full, unshaken, spilled across the table. The same words Ryan once used to abandon us had become our anthem. Not his triumph, ours. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something profound. Ryan and his friends thought they had left us to die, but in truth, they had killed only themselves. We hadn't just survived the wilderness. We had emerged from it unstoppable. And in the end, their betrayal wasn't our ending. It was our beginning.